On the night of the gala, my son-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're just a plumber. Don't embarrass us tonight." His words slammed shut the air around me, heavier than any door. No warning, no kindness, just a verdict that cut through years of sweat, sacrifice, and silence. I stood there with grease still etched into the cracks of my hands, the kind of stains soap could never fully wash out. To him, those hands were a reminder of what I wasn't. A banker, a lawyer, a man with polished shoes and a club membership. To me, they were proof of every pipe I had fixed to keep a family warm, every leak I had sealed to stop a house from rotting, every night I had crawled under cold floors so others could sleep dry and safe. But none of that mattered in his eyes. He reduced it all to one word: plumber. The smirk that followed was worse than the insult. It wasn't just dismissal. It was triumph, like he had finally found the perfect way to put me in my place. Around us, laughter swirled with the clinking of glasses. I saw heads turn, quick whispers, and I felt my dignity shrink beneath their tuxedos and gowns. I didn't argue. Men like me rarely did. You learn early on that raising your voice doesn't patch the hole, doesn't stop the leak, doesn't change the truth in their eyes. So I swallowed the insult like rust in water, but inside it cut deep. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the pipes I fixed had carried more than water. They had carried the weight of my savings, drop by drop, paycheck by paycheck. And while he sneered at the stains on my hands, I carried a secret he could never imagine. That night, when he told me I was just a plumber, he thought he had ended the story. He didn't realize he had only lit the first match. Friends, let me pause here for just a moment. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Has anything like this ever happened in your life? And don't forget, subscribe to the channel and share this video with others. By doing so, you truly help us grow and keep bringing you more stories like this one. And now, we continue. At dinner that night, I kept my hands under the table, calloused, cracked, and rough from years of wrench and iron. They felt out of place against the polished wood and shining silverware. I rubbed my palms against my jeans, but it didn't matter. Grease stains don't wash out easily. Neither do insults. The words from earlier in the evening clung to me like the scent of old copper pipes, sharp and metallic, no matter how hard I tried to push them away. The room buzzed with voices, laughter layered over laughter, the sound of crystal glasses clinking together in easy celebration. I sat among them, but not with them. Every gesture reminded me of the gap between us, their clean fingernails flashing as they held forks delicately, my own fingers rough as bark, scarred with tiny burns and nicks, proof of a lifetime spent in basements and crawl spaces where no one else wanted to go. They spoke about business ventures, about cruises to faraway shores, about new investments that promised to double fortunes. I thought of all the nights I had worked while they slept. Water gushing into dark cellars, pipes bursting in the bitter cold, my knees pressed against frozen concrete floors as I wrestled steel into place. I thought of the countless times I came home reeking of iron and sewage, too tired to eat, too tired to speak, but still waking before dawn to do it all again. And yet all of that, the discipline, the strength, the sacrifice, had been boiled down to a single sentence meant to strip me of worth. Just a plumber. My chest burned with the weight of it. I remembered the years of saving, of folding bills into envelopes hidden in drawers, of watching others spend freely while I told myself to wait, to hold back, to prepare. Every dollar I had put aside carried with it the smell of sweat, the ache of my back, the sting of blisters that broke and healed and broke again. My life was written not in ledgers or contracts, but in the thickened skin of my hands. I stared down at them as the dinner went on. My palms, scarred and stained, told a story no one in that room cared to read. They saw dirt where I saw history. They saw labor where I saw legacy. And as I sat there in silence, a truth began to rise in me, quiet, steady, unshakable. They could mock the stains on my hands, but one day those same stains would sign something they would never laugh at again. When the yacht club invitations went out, I waited, though I told myself I wasn't. I watched the envelopes arrive in the mailboxes of neighbors, saw the thick paper with its embossed crest passed from hand to hand like a symbol of belonging. My name was never on the list. My son-in-law didn't even hide the reason. Men like me wouldn't fit in. The words weren't said with cruelty, but with certainty. The kind of certainty that cuts deeper than a knife, because it carries the weight of agreement, of collective judgment. I watched as my family dressed for the gala, the rustle of gowns, the shine of cufflinks, the careful way ties were knotted in front of mirrors. My presence wasn't forbidden, but it was erased, the way a smudge is wiped from glass. I was neither asked nor included. I was simply invisible. A man who fixed pipes was not the kind of man they wanted walking through doors where chandeliers hung and polished shoes clicked across marble. They feared the smell of metal on me, the grit of dust that seemed to cling no matter how hard I washed. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I had better things to do than stand in rooms filled with hollow laughter and perfumed arrogance. Yet when the night came, and the cars lined up outside, engines humming in the winter air, I felt the emptiness. I felt the cold not just in my bones, but in the place where belonging should have been. They were celebrating something I could never touch, because in their eyes I was not part of it. My work might keep their water running, their kitchens clean, their bathrooms polished, but my name was too stained to be printed on an invitation card. I stayed home that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the dim light above me, staring at the roughness of my fingers. In the silence, I heard faint echoes of music carried on the wind from the direction of the club. They laughed under chandeliers, while I sat in the glow of a single bulb. And in that moment, I understood. Not only was I excluded, I was expected to accept it, to carry it quietly like every other burden I had carried in my life. But what they never knew was that exclusion has a way of planting something stronger than resentment. It plants resolve. And while my name was not on their list, it was already written in a place none of them could see yet, in numbers saved, in sacrifices made, in a legacy that was slowly taking shape. They shut me out, but the story was not over. In the corner of my workshop, between bent wrenches and buckets that still carried the smell of rust and damp earth, there lay a small notebook. Its cover was worn thin, edges curled from years of handling, smudged with fingerprints that no amount of scrubbing could erase. It didn't look like much, just another grease-stained relic of a working man's life, but inside it held the weight of decades. Page after page carried numbers written in a steady, stubborn hand. Every figure represented something withheld, something endured, something quietly conquered. It was the story of my savings, hidden from mocking eyes. While others boasted of investments, yachts, and golf trips, I kept my victories bound in that book. The world saw me come home with grime on my boots and fatigue in my bones, but they never saw the quiet ritual that followed. Night after night, after the last pipe was tightened and the last leak stopped, I would sit alone at the workbench, unfold a worn envelope, and place inside whatever I could spare. Sometimes it was a crisp bill, sometimes just a few coins, but always something. Small sacrifices stacked upon each other until they formed something larger than I had ever thought possible. That notebook was my secret cathedral. Its pages were built from years of sweat dripping into basements, from nights when hunger gnawed at me but I chose not to spend, from mornings when my back ached so badly I could hardly stand, but still forced myself out the door. Each number written in that book was a brick laid in silence, a foundation no ridicule could shake. While they laughed at the stains on my shirt, while they whispered that I did not belong, I was building something far beyond their sight. I would open it sometimes and run my fingers across the ink, as if to remind myself that my life had not been wasted, that every insult endured was another coin in the jar, another line in the ledger. They thought I lived for pipes and paychecks. They thought my hands knew only rust and water. But that little book proved otherwise. It held the truth they could not imagine, that even a man they called just a plumber could be writing a story destined to outlast their laughter. And though no one else could see it yet, I knew. Someday, those numbers would speak louder than their invitations, louder than their tuxedos, louder than their smirks. While others dreamed of new cars with leather seats that carried the smell of wealth, or weekend cruises where champagne spilled into the sea, my dreams lived in something quieter, something no one ever thought to envy. I dreamed of water running clear through every pipe in town, of children bending over fountains without fear of rust or sickness, of mothers filling pots without the bitter taste of iron rising from their taps. I dreamed of streets where basements stayed dry in the winter, where families didn't have to place buckets beneath ceilings every time the snow melted. It was never about luxury for me. I had lived enough years to know that gold watches and painted hulls did not stop the ache in a father's chest when his child coughed from drinking water unfit for them. I had seen too many houses rot from the inside because no one wanted to invest in what lay underground, unseen, forgotten. Pipes, drains, valves. No one celebrated them, no one toasted to them. But I knew the truth. Without them, nothing above could stand. In silence, I let my ledger grow, not for myself, but for that dream. Every time I folded another bill into its pages, I pictured not a yacht or a trip across the ocean, but a fountain in a schoolyard, bright and silver, where children lined up with laughter instead of thirst. I pictured parks with clean water flowing freely, not chained to the privilege of those who could afford bottled glass. I pictured dignity flowing through the veins of a town that too often settled for decay. I never told anyone. To them, money was for prestige, for showing what you had. To me, money was a seed buried deep, invisible, waiting for the right moment to break the surface. And though my dream was mocked before it was even spoken, I carried it with me like a hidden fire. It burned quietly, without applause, waiting for the day it would light the world around me in a way no yacht could ever match. That night, while music spilled out of the yacht club and laughter echoed against marble walls, I was on my knees in a neighbor's basement, sleeves rolled up, drenched in the icy spray of a burst pipe. The floor was slick with water, the air sharp with the smell of iron and mildew, and the only light came from a single bulb that buzzed faintly overhead. My hands, raw and trembling from the cold, tightened the wrench until the threads caught and the water slowed to a reluctant drip. I wiped my forehead with the back of my sleeve, smearing dirt and sweat together, and listened to the silence that followed. Silence that meant a family could sleep without fear of waking to a flooded home. Up the road, they raised glasses and toasted to fortunes I would never touch. I could almost hear their laughter carried by the wind, sweet with wine and arrogance. My absence was not noticed, nor was it mourned. To them I was exactly where I belonged, far from chandeliers and speeches, hidden in the shadows of broken places, patching what others ignored. My pay that night was barely enough to cover groceries, but as I walked home, soaked and tired, I knew I had earned something they never would. I had earned the quiet gratitude of a family whose walls would... I thought of the banquet tables dressed in white cloth, covered in food so rich it would be wasted before the night was over. My own dinner sat cold on the counter, waiting for me in a house that smelled of work and worn leather. Yet the weight I carried was lighter than theirs. They feasted to prove themselves important. I worked because someone needed me. They laughed to fill the emptiness of vanity. I found meaning in the drip of a pipe that no longer bled. As I lay down that night, the ache in my back deep and unforgiving, I thought about how easily they dismissed me. They would never know this basement, never see the water I had stopped, never understand how dignity is born not in chandeliers, but in silence, in work no one applauds. Their laughter rang hollow in the distance, but mine, though faint, came from a place they could never touch. I still remember the day I dared to speak up at the yacht club's building committee. I had been asked to sit in, Not as a member, of course, but as someone who understood the mechanics. They gathered in a bright room overlooking the water, polished shoes tapping against the floor, papers spread neatly across a long oak table. I listened as they argued about chandeliers, imported tiles, the exact shade of marble that would impress their guests. Then, quietly, I cleared my throat and spoke. I told them about the pipes, about the foundation that needed reinforcement, about the danger of water damage beneath the surface if they ignored what they couldn't see. My voice was steady, but the silence that followed was sharper than a blade. And then the chuckles came. Low at first, then growing. "We'll leave the pipes to you, Plumber," one of them said, dismissing years of knowledge with a single flick of arrogance. The words landed heavier than any insult I had carried before. Because I hadn't been trying to elevate myself above them, I had only tried to help. I had thought for a moment that maybe my experience might matter, that maybe the years I had spent crawling under houses and studying the bones of buildings could carry weight in a room like this. But I was wrong. To them, I was useful only when my back was bent and my hands were dirty. The moment I lifted my head and tried to speak as an equal, they reminded me of the boundary they had drawn. I was not to cross it. I sat back in silence as they moved on, their laughter spilling over discussions of chandeliers and imported stone. I realized then how deep the divide truly was. They would rather spend fortunes on what glittered above their heads than a fraction on what kept the walls from rotting beneath them. And when the time came, when leaks spread, when foundations cracked, it would be men like me who carried the weight of their neglect. I left that meeting with my jaw tight, my palms damp with anger I refused to show. Their chuckles followed me down the hall, clinging like a foul stench, but inside me something else took root. They thought they had dismissed me, thought their laughter had closed the matter. They never understood that every dismissal became fuel, every insult became a brick, and one day all of it would build something they would be forced to see. I signed the papers alone, in a small office that smelled of dust and old ink. There were no cameras, no handshakes, no speeches. Just me, a pen, and the trembling weight of years condensed into a single signature. I wrote my name carefully, not because anyone would see it, but because I needed to remember that it was real, that after decades of crawling through mud and rust, of being laughed at and excluded, I had built something powerful enough to change lives. The donation was filed anonymously. No plaque, no banquet, no toast. Just a quiet check that would move through unseen hands and flow into the places that needed it most. I didn't picture the faces of those who mocked me as I signed. I pictured the children in the schoolyards, leaning down to drink from fountains that would sparkle clean. I pictured parks with shining taps instead of locked ones, mothers filling cups without boiling the water first, fathers no longer worried that sickness crept through their own walls. I thought of futures built on something solid, where dignity wasn't reserved for those with invitations, but offered freely to everyone who turned a handle and found life-giving water. When the papers were tucked away, I stepped out into the evening air. The sky was dim, streaked with the last colors of sunset, and I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't lighter, exactly. The weight of labor still lived in my shoulders. The ache of being dismissed still lingered. But there was a strength in the silence, a fierce satisfaction in knowing that no one could strip this from me. They could laugh at my clothes, my hands, my absence from their tables, but they could not erase what I had done in that office. The world would never know the name behind the gift, and that was how I wanted it. Because it was never about proving myself to them. It was about proving that even a man they called just a plumber could leave behind something that outlived the smirks, something that mattered when their banquets ended and their glasses emptied. The check was quiet, but the water it would bring would speak louder than any toast. Weeks later, the yacht club filled once more with the hum of voices, the sparkle of chandeliers, the smell of wine too rich for men like me. Cars lined the drive, gowns swept across marble floors, and laughter swelled in the hall like a tide that never broke. I was there, seated in the shadows at the edge of the room, unnoticed as always, my presence tolerated but never welcomed. They raised their glasses, clinking crystal as though the sound itself proved their worth. I watched silently, feeling the familiar sting of being present yet invisible. Then the room shifted. The president of the club, tall and polished, walked to the microphone. The laughter fell into a hush, and all eyes turned to him. His voice carried across the hall, confident, deliberate, meant to honor someone far above the rank of a laborer. "We'd like to thank a donor," he said, pausing just long enough to let the weight settle, "whose gift has changed our community." The room leaned forward, chairs creaked, smiles froze mid-laugh. I felt the air grow heavy, as if the walls themselves waited for the name. When he spoke it, my name, it cut through the silence like a blade. For a moment it didn't feel real. I almost doubted my own ears, almost thought I had imagined it. But then the ripple began. Heads turned, forks slipped against plates, whispers darted through the room like sparks catching fire. My name, mine, rose above chandeliers and satin gowns, spoken not as mockery, but as recognition. I sat frozen, hands pressed against my knees, the calluses burning as if they had been branded. I had signed the check in silence, believing it would never be tied to me. Yet here it was, unveiled under the glow of golden light, dragging me out of the shadows into the very center I had been denied. Faces that once looked past me now stared wide, disbelieving. I saw confusion harden into shame, saw lips tremble that once curled in smirks, and somewhere in the sea of faces my son-in-law paled, his pride collapsing in on itself. The applause that followed was thunderous. Palms smacked together, voices rose, and the sound echoed off the ceiling like waves against stone. But I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I sat still, rooted in the truth of who I was and what I had done. Their applause was not the reward. The reward had already been poured into pipes, already rushing toward fountains and faucets, already flowing into the hands of children who had never once mocked the man who made it possible. And yet, as my name rolled across the hall, I knew something had shifted forever. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer just a plumber. My name rang through the hall, clear and sharp, echoing against glass and marble like a sound none of them had ever expected to hear. For one suspended moment, the room stopped breathing. Forks froze midair, wine glasses trembled, conversation snapped in half. Even the music seemed to falter, as if the violinist himself had lost the rhythm when the syllables fell from the president's lips. And then it happened. Every face turned. Dozens of eyes, polished and painted, all searching, all landing on the man they had once dismissed without hesitation. On me. I felt their gaze like a weight pressing down from all sides. The same people who used to look through me, now staring as though I had been reborn in front of them. Shock spread across their features. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally something heavier, something they had never shown me before. Recognition. The kind of recognition that strips away pretense, that forces the proud to remember their own cruelty. Whispers flickered through the hall, quick and nervous. The word plumber hissed between their teeth, but this time it carried no laughter, no smirk. It hung instead like an accusation against their own blindness. The title they had used to chain me to the ground suddenly sounded different when paired with what I had given. I saw their throats tighten, their hands shift uncomfortably in their laps, their pride folding in on itself as they realized the man they had pushed to the back was the same man now honored at the front. I did not move. I did not smile, or wave, or offer a bow. I sat with my hands resting on my knees, those scarred, stained hands that had once been ridiculed, now holding the entire room in silence. For the first time in years, I did not feel smaller beneath their chandeliers. I felt taller, taller than their wealth, taller than their marble floors, taller than their paper-thin respect. In their eyes, I saw it clearly. The fracture, the sting, the undeniable truth. They had been wrong. They had always been wrong. And in that moment, without lifting a single finger, I had undone every insult, every exclusion, every whispered dismissal. My name, my ordinary, unadorned name, had turned into something none of them could ever take back. His eyes found mine across the hall, and in that instant, the mask he had always worn slipped away. The easy smirk, the careless superiority, the quiet delight he once took in reminding me of my place, it was gone. What replaced it was something he had never allowed me to see before: fear, and beneath it, shame. He sat frozen, his glass untouched, the color drained from his face, as if the very words he had thrown at me had turned back to strike him. Just a plumber. They hovered on his lips, but he couldn't release them now, not when the truth was ringing louder than his pride ever had. I watched the memory of every insult flicker across his expression, the times he kept me at arm's length during family gatherings, the way he shut me out of decisions, the way he leaned in with that half-smile as though he were doing me a kindness by tolerating me. Now all of it collapsed under the weight of one undeniable reality. The man he had tried to shrink had grown larger than the walls around him. His eyes darted toward others at the table, searching for rescue, for someone else to carry the shame, but no one moved. The silence pressed down heavy, and he was left alone to face what he had always denied: that worth is not dressed in suits or secured in bank accounts, but carved in sacrifice, in work, in the unshakable dignity of what a man leaves behind. For a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. Because I knew what it was to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be judged before a word left my mouth. But pity is not what stirred in me then. What stirred was something deeper, sharper. The satisfaction of knowing that justice does not always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the look a man cannot escape when he sees the truth staring back at him. His shoulders sagged, his jaw clenched, and I could see it. The breaking of pride, the crumbling of the false pedestal he had built for himself out of my humiliation. He looked at me as though I were a stranger, yet also as though I were the only man in the room he had ever truly seen. And I let him look. I did not lower my eyes. I did not offer him relief. Because in that stare he finally learned who I was. Not the shadow he had mocked, not the burden he had dismissed, not the plumber he had tried to make small. He learned the truth, that the man he had scorned was the man who had carried more than pipes, who had carried the weight of a town's thirst, and who now carried the silence of a hall that would never mock me again. They clapped, loud and long, the sound crashing through the hall like a storm trying to wash away years of silence. Palms struck together in rhythm, chairs shifted as people stood, their faces stretched into smiles that hadn't been there before my name was spoken. The applause swelled until it filled the air, until it rattled the chandeliers above their heads, until it seemed to beg me to stand and accept it. But I didn't rise. I sat rooted in my chair, steady as stone, letting the waves of noise break against me without moving. I hadn't given for this. My gift was not born in silk and crystal, not meant for stages or speeches. It was born in basements that smelled of mold, in kitchens where taps groaned with rust, in the quiet ache of children forced to drink water that should have been clean. I hadn't signed that check for them, not for these people with polished shoes and hollow laughter. I had signed it for the ones who never would have been invited here, for the small voices who could not demand clean water, for the mothers who prayed that tomorrow the pipes would not poison their children. The applause grew louder, desperate now, as if they wanted to rewrite the past with the force of their hands. But clapping cannot erase years of ridicule. Smiles cannot heal scars left by words spoken to belittle. I sat still, watching them, hearing them, and feeling the hollow ring of it all. They thought they were giving me honor, but they were only trying to soothe themselves, to cover the sting of their own shame with noise. I folded my hands in my lap. those same hands they had once dismissed as dirty, stained, unworthy. I looked down at the scars, at the lines cut deep from years of turning bolts and lifting iron, and I felt more pride in their silence than in the roar of the crowd around me, because those hands had already given something no applause could ever repay. They had carried water where there was none, dignity where it had been stripped away, hope where laughter once mocked. So I stayed seated. I let them clap. I let them search my face for some sign of gratitude, some acknowledgement that their noise mattered. But I gave them nothing, because I had not given for applause. I had given for water, and water, unlike applause, never lies. It flows, it heals, it endures. And long after their hands grew tired and the hall grew quiet, water would still run where once it had not. At the farthest table, where the shadows lingered and the spotlight never reached, I sat without a tie, without polished shoes, without the armor they believed made a man respectable, and yet, in that moment, I carried more weight than all their silk jackets combined. My presence, once an afterthought, now bent the air around me. The applause had faded, the whispers had softened, but the silence that followed had a gravity all its own. While they shifted uncomfortably in their seats, trying to reconcile the man they had dismissed with the truth unveiled before them, I felt something take its place beside me. It was not pride, nor vengeance. It was dignity, steady and unshakable, pulling up a chair as though it had always belonged at my side. I looked around the hall and saw the absurdity laid bare. They had spent fortunes on chandeliers, on marble floors, polished until they mirrored their own vanity, on bottles of wine older than some of their children, and yet all of it seemed suddenly small, diminished by the truth of what had just happened. Wealth without purpose is weightless. Laughter, built on mockery, dissolves like smoke. But the dignity of a man who has labored honestly, given quietly, and endured silently, that is heavier than gold. My seat, far from the center, became a throne of its own, not draped in velvet, not gilded with carvings, but crowned in something no banquet could purchase. They had tried to bury me in corners, to shrink me into silence, to relegate me to the margins of their gatherings, and still here I sat, larger than their stages, richer than their tables, untouchable by their false measures. Dignity has no need of chandeliers to shine. It glows from within, steady as a flame that will not go out. And in that hall, with all their eyes still glancing toward me, I understood something deeper than their applause could ever give. I did not need their seat, their tie, their approval, because the farthest table had become the highest ground, and beside me, unseen yet undeniable, dignity had claimed its place. When it was done, I rose without a word. No champagne glass in my hand, no smile prepared for photographs, no need to linger in the warmth of chandeliers that had never been lit for me. The applause had already drained into silence, and what remained was the hollow clatter of silverware being reset, the rustle of gowns shifting uncomfortably as I stood. I did not wait for acknowledgement nor for permission. I simply walked. The marble floors echoed beneath my steps, each one steady, each one heavier than their banquets, carrying me out of the hall that had once tried to shut me out. There were no cameras trailing me, no flashbulbs capturing the moment, no eager hands reaching to shake mine. And yet, for the first time, I felt like the whole world had turned to see, because this walk was not away from them. It was toward myself. I no longer carried the burden of being dismissed, the ache of being invisible, the sting of their laughter. I carried only the weight of truth, and it was enough. The doors loomed ahead, tall and cold, but they no longer felt like barriers. They felt like thresholds. I passed beneath them with the same hands they had mocked, the same shoulders they had tried to bend, the same heart they had tried to belittle. Only now none of that mattered. Their wealth had shrunk behind me, their banquets reduced to noise I no longer had to hear. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, crisp and real, without perfume or pretense. It smelled of earth and water, of the world I knew best. My breath rose in the cold, and for the first time in years I felt free of the need to prove my worth to anyone. They could keep their toasts, their photos, their fragile crowns. My legacy was already moving through pipes and fountains, already alive in places they would never step foot in. Each step away from that hall was a step into truth. I walked without looking back, because there was nothing behind me worth reclaiming. I had not lost anything in that room. I had only left behind the lie that I needed them to see me. And with every echo of my shoes against the pavement, I felt it deeper. I had nothing left to prove. Months later, long after the banquet had been forgotten and the applause had dissolved into the dust of memory, the fountain stood. Bright metal, polished not by chandeliers but by the eager hands of children who pressed the handles down and laughed as the streams of water burst forth. Their voices filled the schoolyards, their shoes scuffed the concrete around the bases, their faces tilted upward with joy as they drank. They did not know about the marble floors, the clinking glasses, the way my name had been spoken like a revelation in a room that once denied me. They only knew that clean water flowed where before there had been rust, that thirst no longer meant fear. I visited once, quietly, standing off to the side where no one noticed me. I watched a boy fill his paper cup and hand it to his little sister before taking one himself. I saw mothers leaning against the fence, relieved to know their children were safe, no longer sipping from taps that tasted of iron and sickness. No one pointed me out, no one clapped, and I did not need them to, because the sound of water striking metal and the laughter of children rising into the air was louder than any ovation I had ever heard. The fountains bore my name, engraved small at the base, not in gold, not in flourished script, just plain letters etched into steel. To most it was just another plaque, something unnoticed in the rush of daily life. But to me, it was proof carved in permanence that the years of labor, the decades of being mocked and dismissed, had not been wasted. Every callus, every scar, every night spent crawling through mud and freezing water had led to this. A gift that could not be erased, not by insults, not by laughter, not by exclusion. The children would grow up never knowing the story. They would not remember the smirks, the whispered words of "just a plumber." They would not carry the weight of those rooms where I was invisible. All they would ever know was that when they pressed the handle, water came, clean, abundant, life-giving. And in that simple truth my legacy lived. Not in titles or invitations, not in photographs or applause, but in something that would outlast me, something that would remain long after my name was forgotten by the ones who once denied it. I walked away from the schoolyard with a quiet heaviness in my chest, not the heaviness of shame, but of fulfillment. I thought of my son-in-law, of the men in their jackets, of the halls that had echoed with laughter at my expense. They had built their lives. Justice had not come in thunder, nor in vengeance. It had come in pipes and fountains, in the laughter of children, in the truth that could not be mocked away. My name, carved into the steel, whispered only one thing, that once a man they called just a plumber had decided it should flow, and so it did. And in that, my story was complete.